Hello, everybody. Um, Before I begin, I'll just take a moment to do a land acknowledgement. Although we're all joining virtually, all of us are connected in as members of our Calgary community. The University of Calgary, located in the heart of southern Alberta, both acknowledges and pays tribute to the traditional territories of the people of Treaty 7, which include the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, which includes the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. As a staff member who works for the university's mental health and well-being strategy, I acknowledge and honor the presence of the people who have stewarded these lands, who have generously offered Indigenous knowledge and traditional teachings on wellness and well-being. On this land and in this place and with one another, we strive to continue gathering, learning, walking, and growing together in a good way in the environments we study, teach, work, and play in. So welcome to this online, give me a sec here, this online somatic workshop, Feeling Your Feelings with Simone Saunders. We're so grateful to have Simone join us for this UFlourish event. UFlourish is presented by Student Wellness Services, Staff Wellness, and UCalgary's renewed Community Mental Health and Wellbeing Strategy. This workshop explores the causes and effects of body disconnection, the impact of a dysregulated nervous system, and strategies to start feeling your feelings. Attendees will also be introduced to somatic, body-based exercises designed to support emotional regulation. This is a 90-minute workshop with extra time for Q&A after for those who can stay. Please note this workshop will be recorded. However, personal identifiers such as names and video will be removed from the final recording. Simone Saunders is a seasoned registered social worker and also a UCalgary alumni. She's a therapist, content creator, and speaker dedicated to fostering mental health awareness and destigmatizing mental health issues within BIPOC communities. With a wealth of experience in the field, Simone has emerged as a trusted advocate and educator, committed to breaking down barriers surrounding mental health. As the founder and director of the Cognitive Corner, she's established a culturally responsive and trauma-informed group psychological practice where she and her team ensure mental health services are not only accessible, but tailored to the unique needs of individuals who access services. Simone, it's an absolute pleasure to have you with us today. Please take it away.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to do this workshop with you all today. So before I get into everything, I think it's always helpful to do a little bit of a check-in. And so you can just check in the chat, but given the fact that this is a somatic workshop or body-based workshop, in the comment section, if you could note one thing that you can physically feel. So that could be as simple as like the sweater on your body, that could be your stomach hurting, maybe muscle tension, something that you can note that you can physically feel. And then also maybe what you're hoping to get out of today's workshop. As Sasha said, I am the founder and director of the Cognitive Corner. So the Cognitive Corner provides culturally responsive and trauma-informed mental health care. And so we do individual therapy, group therapy, and workshops, consultation, keynote speaking. And we've recently started doing community events, which has been really exciting for us. One of the things that we had noted throughout the last few years is one of the largest sort of feedback that we get from clients is the experience of loneliness and how difficult that is, especially, post-grad and all of those different things. And so we started doing community events so that people can sort of connect and foster friendships, which has been really awesome to see. So moving on today, and feel free to, I see some check-ins in the comments, which is great. And so I think the idea here as well is to be able to foster sort of a sense of curiosity around a lot of these different pieces. And the way that I generally do workshops is a little bit more interactive. So I'll be sort of calling on thoughts, opinions, questions, and all of those different pieces. So before we get into the workshop today, a few reminders is that all practices are an invitation and not an obligation. So it's really important to do whatever feels best for you. And so if what feels best is just observing and sort of taking in the information, that's great. If what feels best is to engage in some of the practices, that is also great. The second point here is to create a space of curiosity rather than judgment. And so that's for both yourself and your peers. And the idea around curiosity is that we're really taking a look at, instead of, okay, what's wrong with me or why am I feeling that way? Really understanding, okay, what is this about? Because I think it takes away the shame a lot for, again, not only ourselves, but our peers to really understand, even if, our feelings don't make sense or some of the things that we're experiencing doesn't feel like it makes sense. The idea is if we sort of look at that with curiosity, it makes it a little bit easier to sort of tease out and really understand the information that we're getting. And then the last point there is that there's no wrong way to feel. So again, taking a look at that lens of curiosity, there isn't a wrong way to feel. Everything that comes up is simply just information for us to go off of. And so I'm taking a little read through the comments, which is nice to see. I see softness of a new shirt on my skin, hot tea mug, feeling a little bit stressed and tired, pressing the headphones on your ears, a little bit of a headache, fuzzy socks. Amazing. Okay, so a little bit of an agenda. So today we're going to go through really understanding body disconnection, the impact of a dysregulated nervous system, the language of the body, a little bit of an introduction to regulation, some guided somatic practice, and building a regular somatic practice. And so something to note is that this is only a 90-minute workshop. And so we will be sort of dipping our toe into it. And the idea is to sort of give you an understanding and a little bit of a taste of what is, body disconnection all about. What does it even mean to have a dysregulated nervous system? And what are some of the things that I can do in order to continue that curiosity throughout my day-to-day and, implement some somatic practices in my day-to-day. So a good place that I like to start when really talking about feelings, emotions, nervous system dysregulation, all of those different pieces, is really understanding emotions and feelings and the difference between the two. And of course, a lot of times those two words are used interchangeably, which I personally think is fine. But really understanding the difference between the two can be helpful for us as we sort of navigate this journey. So emotions are sort of our automatic and psychological and physical responses to our internal or external environment, whereas feelings are our subjective experiences of emotions. So, for example, when I personally get anxious, which is sort of a derivative of fear, my body gets really tingly, my body temperature tends to increase. I personally get a lot quieter, whereas that might not be the subjective experience for other people. So the feeling of anxiety for someone else might be different. Someone else might feel anxiety and maybe their body gets really cold. Maybe they take up more space. Maybe they start to get louder. And so the feelings are subjective experiences. So they're different from person to person and based off of your life experience, how you grew up, the different pieces of identity that you hold in the world. Whereas emotions are sort of that automatic sort of physical response that we have to our internal or external environment. And the idea about both emotions and feelings is the purpose of them is simply just information. And the information is that they often will signal a need for us. They might motivate our action impulses. They can help assist in communication. And I always take a look at emotions and feelings as neither good nor bad. They just are. They're just information. And again, that sort of helps us understand what's going on with ourselves and sort of helps again with that lens of curiosity. When we look at feelings and emotions as simply just information, simply our body and our nervous system and our brain trying to tell us a little bit more about our environment, then it helps us process it a little bit more. So for example, if you are feeling really angry, then the purpose of that could be that it's information that maybe a boundary has been crossed. Maybe something feels like it's unfair. Maybe if you're feeling really sad, then it could tell you that maybe there has been a rupture in a relationship, that that connection was really important to you. Or again, maybe a boundary was crossed. And so again, when we look at all of this as simply just information, it allows us to sort of navigate the world a little bit easier. So one of the sort of terms that you may have heard sort of floating around the mental health community is processing. So processing your trauma, processing your feelings, processing your experiences. And a lot of times we might sort of hear that terminology, but not really know exactly what it means. So when we talk about processing our experiences, there's what's called the core organizers. And these are sort of our building blocks of our present moment experiences. So we have our body sensations, which could look like external, like the feeling of maybe my sweater being a little bit itchy against my skin. It could be maybe my stomach grumbling, maybe my throat is dry. Those would be some body sensations. For 5 sense perception, that could look like the things that you hear, the things that you're smelling, the things that you taste, the things that you see, the things that you can touch. As far as cognitions, that's sort of what's going through your mind from moment to moment. What is your thought pattern at this current moment? As far as movement, I tend to talk a lot with my hands, so my body is always moving. But what does your body want to do while you're in this present moment? So if you are feeling really sad, for example, maybe your posture changes. Maybe you hunch over a little bit. Maybe you make yourself a little bit smaller. Maybe if you're feeling really excited, you make yourself feel really big. Your arms spread out. Your body just wants to expand a little bit. And with emotions, similar to how we chatted about before, what are you feeling in that moment? So from moment to moment, in the background, your nervous system is taking in all of this sort of sensory input and trying to process a lot of these different experiences. And what happens for a lot of us is that we either suppress or sort of just ignore or miss some of these elements. So an example that I could give you is if I were to be talking to you about a breakup, and let's say that I'm explaining this breakup to you and I'm saying that, we made spaghetti, and me recalling this or me being in that moment, I'd be using the 5 sense perception. So the smell and the taste of spaghetti. So me and my partner, we made spaghetti together, and then we got into this massive argument and he was yelling at me. Again, that 5 sense perception of sound. And I'm explaining this to you and I'm telling you that I feel so devastated, right? Which is sort of a derivative of sad. So it's the emotional piece. And maybe when I'm talking about this, I am expressing myself with posture change. So maybe I'm like hunched over, maybe my head is dropped. And that's the movement piece. What does my body feel like doing? And maybe I'm explaining to you that I'm just really worried that I'm just going to be alone forever. And that would be the cognition piece. So that's my meaning making. What am I thinking about as this experience is happening? And so what's missing here? Which would be the body sensations. So some of the things that I ask my clients all the time is when you experience a certain emotion, ask yourself, how do you know? So if you're experiencing sadness, how do you know that you're sad? Outside from the cognitive experience of I'm sad or the crying. What does your body do to tell you that, ooh, I'm really sad right now? What does your body do, or how does your body feel when you're really angry, when you're really happy, when you're excited? So using this breakup example again, that devastation from a breakup might feel like a tightening in my chest. It might feel like a pit in my stomach. It might feel like maybe a dry throat, maybe welling up of my eyes. And so it's not necessarily that we have to speak on, okay, I can feel a pit in my stomach. I can feel, the dry throat. It's more so an awareness of this is what that emotion feels like for me. Because oftentimes we can feel something on the surface, and other times it means something completely different. So talking about sort of our present moment experience, our nervous system in the background is taking all of this sensory input and trying to make sense of it all. And so in talking about our nervous system, I think it's really important to understand what even is our nervous system. So the best way that I love to explain the nervous system is with the analogy of a smoke detector. So our amygdala is like a smoke detector of the brain. So similar to the smoke detector in your house, if you are making a grilled cheese, you burn the grilled cheese, smoke detector's going off. If your house is up in flames, smoke detector is also going off. And so your amygdala, which is again, the emotion center of the brain, is similar in the sense that it can't really tell the difference between real and perceived danger. So what happens when the smoke detector goes off is one of your survival responses kick in. So that could be fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So the flight could look quite literally like running away from a threat. It could also look like escapism. So that could be suicidal ideation, self-harm, impulsivity, substance use, all of those different things. Fight, again, could be quite literally fighting with someone, but it could just be more so of a aggressive persona, right? So I need to make myself big so that I can fight people off. Fawn would be your people-pleasing response and sort of just acquiescing to whoever or whatever the situation calls for. And then the freeze response would be internally, there's a lot of activity, there's a lot of emotional energy, and then externally, you're sort of numb. So you can think of sort of like a stage fright sort of response. So what happens when the smoke detector of your brain turns on? Your survival responses turn on, or one of them turns on, and your prefrontal cortex turns off. And our prefrontal cortex, essentially, its job is to help us make logical decisions, help us think things through, all of that kind of stuff. So when this is turned off, you might objectively think, okay, that might not be the most helpful. But in reality, if you're in a situation where you need to make a split-second decision, it is very helpful. So for example, if a bear were to come and run through this room right now, it would not be helpful for me to sit here and think about, okay, can I fight the bear? Am I strong enough? Can I outrun the bear? Should I play dead? What should I do? Because at that point in time, I probably would already be dead. So smoke detector turns on, our brain makes a split-second decision based off of our previous experiences or the information that we have off of hand to decide, okay, what is my best chance at survival? What am I going to do to survive the situation? And something I know that has come up a lot in my work with clients is that there's a lot of shame sometimes about the different survival responses that they have. And the idea is like, okay, well, why do I do this? And why can't I do something different? Because I don't necessarily like the survival responses that I tend to choose. But more often than not, it's not always in your control once you get to that point. So again, if a bear were to come through this room and, let's say there's a back door over here, maybe I decide to play dead. And afterwards I can maybe say, man, why didn't I just use that back door? Why did I decide to play dead? Why didn't I use the bear spray that, is on the counter over there? But again, your amygdala is choosing in that split-second moment because it feels like there's danger, whether it's an actual bear or a perceived bear. How am I going to keep myself safe? So the window of tolerance, this diagram on the screen, this is sort of a really good visual example for your nervous system. So when you're in your window of tolerance, so that's sort of the ideal state, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you are calm and collected. It just means that your prefrontal cortex is online. So you're able to think things through. So you could be sad, you could be angry, you could be happy, you could be upset, all in your window of tolerance. But again, the idea is that this guy is online. Once you get to your hyperarousal, which is that red zone up there, that is your more emotionally activated states. So that's where you're going to find your fight and your flight, and the freeze energy, the internal freeze energy, borrows some hyperarousal. So hyperarousal is always your more emotionally activated states. So again, you might notice when you're hyperaroused that you might be really impulsive. There might be, let's say gambling, shopping, suicidality comes up there as well, self-harm. Whereas hypoarousal, which is that gray zone, that is more of your emotionally deactivated space. So you might notice a lot of numbness, a lot of exhaustion, dissociation often happens here. It's really difficult to sort of bring yourself to get up or do things. So you might feel really heavy and weighed down. So oftentimes we might oscillate between the two states. We might spend a lot of time in one particular state. It really just is person to person and is dependent on the survival strategies that we pick up. And so the idea of whether it's therapy or self-improvement work or whatever you want to call it is to widen your window of tolerance. Because when you've experienced trauma and hardship and adversity, your window of tolerance shrinks. And when it shrinks, that means that it doesn't really take very much to get you into that red zone or that gray zone. So you might know someone, or you might be this person where it feels like, okay, one little thing can happen, and then all of a sudden you're just feeling dysregulated. And so generally the reason is because the window of tolerance is quite small. So again, the work of therapy and all of those different pieces is slowly widening the window of tolerance so that you're able to experience different pieces of emotional activation, uncomfortable emotions, uncomfortable experiences, while remaining regulated. So one piece that I always like to mention is that the work of widening your window of tolerance is slow work. And the reason why it's slow work is because you have to both be able to detect safety while experiencing some element of dysregulation. So you kind of have to have your foot in both worlds in order to sort of widen that window. So for example, in therapy, the therapeutic relationship is typically what serves as that safe space. So you have your anchor in the therapeutic relationship, and then you're able to sort of explore some of those really tough and uncomfortable and dysregulating experiences or emotions. So I have a video to play, which is a video that I posted online quite a while ago. And so the idea is that it's a little bit of a role play to model sort of the window of tolerance. And then we'll have a little bit of a group discussion afterwards. And if you could just give me a thumbs up or a yes in the chat to make sure that you guys can hear everything okay.
Yeah, my dad gave me the silent treatment this weekend, and he typically does that when he's upset, which is really frustrating. It just makes me feel alone.
That must be really hard, getting the silent treatment and having your dad just not talk to you. Did that happen a lot when you were younger?
That definitely happened a lot when I was younger. I got the silent treatment a lot.
What's happening for you right now? How are you feeling?
How am I feeling? Honestly, I feel a little bit tired. Otherwise, I don't really feel anything. I'm just a little bit tired now.
Okay, you're feeling a little bit tired. How would you feel if we tried an experiment together?
Yeah, we can try.
Okay, the first one we're gonna do together is I'm gonna get you to plant your feet on the floor, and I want you to just press into the floor as hard as you can and just see what you notice.
It's kind of cramping my toes up a little bit, but I can feel it in my toes.
Okay, now let's stand up. And again, I just want you to press your feet into the floor, just see what you notice.
Yeah, I can feel it in my legs. I feel a bit tired.
Your arms back and forth.
Oof.
Has that exhaustion moved, changed at all?
I'm feeling it start to lift, I guess.
Let's sit back down. Are you feeling thirsty at all?
I'm not super thirsty right now, actually.
So the last experiment I want to try is just grabbing you a glass of ice water. I know that you said that you're not thirsty. The point of it is to help regulate your nervous system a little bit more with the temperature of the water.
Okay, I'll give it a try.
As you drink the water, let me know what kind of sensations come up for you.
Yeah, I can feel it going down my throat. That's really cool. Yeah, that was really triggering.
Okay. So you can put it in the chat, you can raise your hand. Tell me your thoughts and feelings while watching sort of the relationship between the therapist and the client there, and some of the dysregulation that you notice. Very little eye contact. Physical movements, grabbing ear, twiddling fingers. Distance. There was trust between the two, so the client was willing to try the recommendations. Absolutely. Body posture, slightly slouched. Not trying to solve the emotion, but just bring back to the window of tolerance. Therapist didn't push, but invited and was supportive. Absolutely. I think something to note too is that the signs of dysregulation can sometimes be really subtle. So a lot of times when we think of a dysregulated nervous system, we think of this big, massive emotional experience, when a lot of times it can be really subtle. So in this video, for example, they're talking about a situation that happened with her mom, and all of a sudden she starts to get really tired. She starts to get really lethargic. The energy sort of drains out of the room, right? And easily we can dismiss that as, I'm just feeling tired. I'm just not feeling it right now, right? Whereas really, I think that it's really important to take a look at, okay, what's happening here? Again, taking the lens of curiosity. Is it that I'm tired? Because it could absolutely be just a physical exhaustion thing. But I wonder what it would mean if it was about the story that you were sharing, or the emotions that you're experiencing, or maybe the emotions that your nervous system doesn't feel safe to experience. And then I also got a question around what if it is a big emotional dysregulation, which typically would look more so like in the hyperarousal space. So this was more of an example around hypoarousal, whereas hyperarousal, that's when you would probably see a little bit more of like the big emotional responses, whether that's externally or internally. And so again, the relationship with the therapist, that was the anchor that made it feel safe. And the idea of curiosity with the therapist around, even some of the language. Could we try something? What would it be like if? What do you think about? How does your body feel when we do this? And explaining some of the different pieces. So a lot of these different pieces sort of assist the client in helping them to feel safe. So I'm curious from you folks, I'll go back to the diagram of the window of tolerance, but where do you tend to see yourself the most if there is sort of a state that you spend more time in? Do you find yourself more in hyperarousal, your window, or hypoarousal? And I'm seeing a comment that says hypo seems easier to mask in a day-to-day life rather than hyper. Absolutely. We got a lot of hypo. And I got a question that asked, is it possible to bounce between the two? Absolutely. And as far as bouncing between the two, a lot of people will find as well that they might be in hyperarousal, and because of all of the emotional energy that it takes to be hyperaroused, instead of regulating back to the window of tolerance, then they're in hypoarousal. So moving on to sort of looking at body disconnection sort of as a trauma response. So our nervous system, this is sort of the way our nervous system operates. And ideally, we don't necessarily need to go into hyperarousal or hypoarousal unless there's this massive threat, right? But what happens when that threat is there all the time, or that threat has been sort of our blueprint, whether it's growing up or in early adulthood or whenever we experience those things? So the reason that body disconnection even happens to begin with is for the purpose of protection. So it protects us from the overwhelming arousal or physical feelings and physical sensations. So there's multiple different reasons for disconnection from your body, whether that is trauma from like childhood, sexual violation, sexualization, food and diet culture. There's so many different reasons that can relate to your childhood and trauma, or just the way that we're socialized in general. So that disconnection, again, protects you from the overwhelming feelings of arousal. And so it's really important to understand how the disconnection has actually helped you keep you safe, because it developed sort of as a coping mechanism. And it can often feel really dangerous to even think about letting it go. So in the chat, if you feel comfortable, again, remember that everything is an invitation and not an expectation. But how has disconnecting kept you safe personally? And I think to also provide some context, I like to sort of refer to our survival responses often as sort of overdeveloped coping skills, because I think we can often label them as maladaptive or bad or whatever the case might be. But at some point in time, we needed that coping skill, whether that's, dissociation, suicidal ideation, self-harm, whatever it might be. And it helped keep us safe. It helped us manage the overwhelming feelings or sensations. And at this point in time, which is why I imagine most of us are here today, it feels like, okay, that might not be the most helpful. So from a nervous system perspective, it's really important to take a look at those overdeveloped coping skills as, okay, this is something that's even currently trying to keep me safe. Even though the danger isn't there anymore, it's still trying to keep me safe. So I'm reading your responses sort of as we go along, but keeps me from overthinking and actually getting through the day-to-day, feeling like you have to disconnect in order to keep moving forward with responsibilities, to be able to talk about something that feels big, helpful distraction. I think the theme I'm seeing here is that generally it helps you just move forward with your day-to-day if you're disconnected. So when we take a look at our relationship with our body, it's really important to sort of understand how do we feel about our body? When we're thinking about connecting to it, how do we even feel about it? And so I have a questionnaire that I'm going to pull up that we'll all kind of complete together. So while folks finish up, if there is anyone left that wants to complete the quiz, if you want to put in the chat, if you want to raise your hand and mute yourself, how did that quiz feel to take? Vulnerable? Uncomfortable? eye-opening. Didn't realize how negative I was. Anxious. Feels like my body deserves more care and attention. And so just notice, again, with curiosity, not necessarily judgment, the feelings that you experience while doing the quiz, after doing the quiz, seeing the results. I think you guys can also see the results of everyone's, I hope. But just notice what that's like. Is there a question that felt more difficult to answer than the rest of them? Is there a question that felt like it stood out the most? I like the question on how often do you notice your body feels good versus negative. The question, do I tend to recognize what's wrong with my body when, but have difficulty when something's going right? The one about feeling like your body is your own. So I think it's really a good baseline to understand, okay, how do we feel about our body? And the way I look at it is that it's a relationship. It's not something that has to stay sort of stagnant. It's a relationship. And so how do we feel about our body? And this gives us a template to understand how we might be treating our body. And if we feel negatively about it, if we feel like our body is betraying us, if we feel all of these different things, then that's sort of a rupture that we have to work through. Reading a couple of the last ones. Question about whether I do things I love with my body. Okay, so you guys can't see the results, it seems. I'm going to end the poll, and I hope that then you guys can see the results. Oops. Oh, yes. Okay. Can you guys see that now? Perfect. Yeah, so this is the results, which is, a mixed bag of results, but I think a few stand out to me around that is my body often scrutinized or criticized. Most people said agree. Do I tend to override my bodily signals? Most people agreed. Do I use my body to do things I love? Most people agreed. Do I feel annoyed by my body often? Do I feel ashamed? Do I ignore signals such as hunger, thirst, bathroom needs? Most people said yes to that. So it's really important to understand your relationship with your body, because when your body is sort of shouting at you to get different needs met, eventually it stops, shouting, and it gets tired. So if you think about like hunger and bathroom cues, for example, if you just ignore your hunger long enough, oftentimes it goes away, and then you remember, maybe because you feel severely hungry or because you start to feel dizzy or whatever the case might be, right? And we might not even notice, okay, I have to go to the bathroom, or I'm hungry, or I'm so thirsty, until it gets to that point of feeling really detrimental. Like, I need to eat now. I need to down like a full liter of water. And so what often happens is, the reason that happens is because those little cues get missed. And so eventually our body just doesn't even really signal it to us, or it doesn't even show it to us. And so it's not that it's not happening. It's more so that we're just unaware of it. So I like to sort of look at body sensations and all of those different things, similar to, I forget the exact term of it, but it's this theory around If you decide, okay, I'm going to look for red cars, then you're going to see red cars everywhere. But it's not necessarily that there's been an increase in red cars. It's just that you decided to look at it. And so when we start to look at the different sensations that we feel and the different emotions that we feel, we might notice like, oh my God, this is getting worse. I'm feeling everything. There's too much happening. But it's not necessarily that it's getting worse per se. It's more so that you're just aware of it. So all of these things happen in the background and they come out in different ways. But once we're aware of it, that's when we can actually sort of acknowledge these different pieces. So moving on to sort of why your body disconnects from itself, I think it's really important to talk about identity and how that really shapes different pieces of why our body might disconnect from itself. So taking a look at like the different aspects that make up your identity, it influences our relationship with our body and our ability or inability to feel connected. So that could be our race, our gender, body size, chronic illness. I saw in the chat someone put sexuality and so many other different aspects of your identity. So in the chat, you can let us know sort of how has different aspects of your identity impacted your relationship with your body. So, for example, if we think culturally, there is not necessarily that much research around like women's health, right? And so being disconnected from our bodies is something that often happens for women, right? If we think about menstrual pain, that's something that is supposedly normal and common, right? But because it's normal and common and there isn't, again, very much research or the amount of necessary research, most people have to disconnect from, okay, I feel pain, but it's fine. I'm still going to go to work. I'm still going to do this. I'm still going to do that. I just got to push through. If you live in a body that is often sexualized, whether that is because of body size, the different like physical attributions of your body, your race, whatever it might be, then again, how does that impact your relationship with your body? How does that impact your ability to be connected or disconnected? So again, in the chat, throw in sort of how has different aspects of your identity impacted your relationship with your body? And you can also raise your hand and unmute yourself if you'd like. Giving birth, being a mother, all the responsibility made me put my body in least priority. Absolutely. Being female has impacted a lot. Anybody else before we move on? I have to come to understand that being a white woman has afforded me certain privileges and that I can have an impact on people and spaces that I might not be aware of. Absolutely. Being neurodivergent with experiencing sensory overload can make me feel frustrated with my body if I'm feeling overwhelmed by the things that I'm feeling. Absolutely. And I think that that's, a great one to bring up. Again, this is a condensed version, but typically in like the 3-week-long version of this workshop, we talk a lot about these different pieces of our identity, right? And so being neurodivergent, that's, a whole other ball game as far as body connectivity, because there, is different pieces that you're challenged with that makes it more challenging to be connected to your body. My disability means I have experiences that aren't often represented. Absolutely. It can make it hard to describe them and other people might not validate them. Thank you all for sharing. So taking a look at sort of, again, the nervous system and body disconnection and the impact of that. So when our stress response is constantly on, when our cortisol is just pumping through our body, what's the impact, right? So it can impact our brain, it can impact our skin, cardiovascular system, our gut, reproductive system, our immune system, our joints and our muscles. And some of the impacts of body disconnection or chronic stress and trauma is chronic illnesses, physical health issues, relationship breakdowns, increased loneliness and isolation, increased likelihood of substance reliance, decreased work performance. So transitioning into sort of how does the body speak to us? Like, what is the language of the body? We'll talk a little bit about procedural learning. So procedural learning is the language of the body. So essentially procedural learning is, our body creates patterns based off of our environment, how we feel, and how other people treat us. So essentially it's the process of acquiring skills in order to execute certain behaviors without conscious knowledge. So if you think about the scale of tying your shoe, at first, when you learn it, you have to really focus on the bunny ears and all of those different things, right? But after a while, you can just tie your shoe, no problem. Doesn't really take much thought or effort. So that would be procedural learning. So after a while, your body knows the hand gestures that you need to do in order to tie your shoe. And I'm sure that a lot of us can think about when was the last time I consciously thought about how to tie my shoe versus just doing it. That goes with driving, that goes with so many different pieces. And so it doesn't just, procedural learning isn't just in that arena. It also includes visceral sensations, right? Again, so that could be like a drop in the stomach, butterflies, whatnot. That includes posture, the tightening and relaxing of your muscles, movements, gestures, your facial expressions, your heartbeat, your breath, the changes in your autonomic arousal or your nervous system. So procedural learning is really how your body communicates to you on a day-to-day, moment-to-moment basis. So when you experience different emotions based off of your procedural learning, your body habitually sort of reacts in certain ways. So if I experience sadness, for example, and maybe crying is not something that I feel comfortable doing in front of other people because that's the way I grew up, or that's just been my narrative. So if sadness comes up and I feel that urge to cry, if I'm around people, the procedural learning would be suppress it, shut it down, right? If I feel angry, and maybe anger is a really triggering emotion for me and it causes me to just have outbursts, right? My procedural learning might be when I'm angry, my heart rate quickens, my body temperature goes up. Maybe initially I just immediately start yelling, my fists ball up, whatever that may be. So I like to show a video as a good example of procedural learning. So it's a portion of the Inside Out 2 YouTube trailer. And so I want you to just take note of Riley and the different emotions, and just take note of the procedural learning. So the different movements, the different habits that she has that go with each emotion. And then we'll chat a little bit about it afterwards. And again, just give me a thumbs up if you can hear.
Joy. This is sadness. That's anger. This is disgust. And that's fear. We're Riley's emotions.
Okay. Now you can raise your hand, you can throw it in the chat. What did you notice about procedural learning with Riley's emotions specifically? Each one had distinct facial expressions, body postures, movement of Riley's body from emotion to emotion. You want to see this slide before this for reference? Absolutely. So with happiness, you might notice that her body wanted extra movement and she was wiggling and dancing, right? With sadness, you might notice that her body just slumped over. With anger, her body just tensed, right? And then she started throwing the cards and whatnot. With disgust, you saw this grimace on her face. She visibly looked just disgusted and nauseous. With fear, you notice that she like gasped and jumped. So with Riley, in this state at least, what you notice is that these are all sort of her unaltered emotions. This is before she goes through any sort of trials and tribulations, any sort of trauma or any of that, right? And so this is her baseline emotional state. This is her procedural learning based off of authentically experiencing her emotions, right? But then what happens when you do introduce things like trauma or hardship or adversity, right? So your experience of sadness or happiness or fear might look a little bit different based off of your experiences. So your own procedural learning might be that, okay, anger wasn't an emotion that I was allowed to have growing up. It was only for adults, or just generally it wasn't for me. I wasn't allowed to have that. So what is my procedural learning when anger does come up? Maybe that means that I don't get to experience it, that I push it down. Maybe that means that because I didn't get to experience it, it's now super, super loud. And so reflecting on the different pieces of procedural learning, and again, this is a very big concept, but taking a look at trying to just narrow it for the purpose of this workshop, when we go through our day-to-day, our reactions to things, how our body feels about things, is generally comes from somewhere. There's a blueprint. So the blueprint is usually set by different either experiences that we've collected over time or different monumental experiences. So if we've had big experiences of our emotions always being shut down, then our procedural learning is that our feelings don't really matter anyways. So you either shut them down, or sometimes conversely, you make them a lot bigger so that people will see them. Do we have any questions about procedural learning before we move on? Okay. So we're going to do a little bit of practice with procedural learning. And again, this is an invitation, not an expectation. So we're going to play a little bit with posture. So if you have the ability, you can stand up. If you don't have the ability, you can try and play around with posture just in your seat. And so we're going to play around with a few different postures. And I want you to just, again, be curious and just notice what's happening for you. So we're going to have a bit more of a discussion after we're sort of complete through the postures. But if you can stand up, then you can stand. And if you can't, just again, do this sort of in your chair, in your bed, or wherever you are. And the first posture is just stand straight up with your shoulders slumped and your head down. And just notice how your body feels. Notice any physical sensations. Notice any thoughts, memories, feelings. And we're just going to hold that for a few moments. We're going to switch postures. And again, I want you to have your feet firmly on the ground. And I want you to lean back a little bit with your hands on your hips, chest out, and your head a little bit high. And so you're bouncing a little bit on the heels. And just notice again how this feels. Any thoughts, feelings, memories, or sensations that come up. It's comfortable or uncomfortable. Just spend a few moments here. And then we're going to switch again and feet firmly planted on the ground. And we're going to cross our arms. Our head is going to be straight, but our gaze is going to be down. And again, just notice any thoughts, feelings, memories, or sensations. And then whenever you're ready, you can come back to the room. And again, you can either unmute yourself, you can throw it in the chat, but was there a particular posture that felt more familiar or more comfortable to you? Crossing arms. I typically always cross my arms. Power pose. First two reminded me of yoga postures. Felt the most comfortable. First posture felt relaxing. Leaning back with hands on the hips felt unusual and awkward. Was there a particular pose that made you feel really vulnerable? Chest open, head up, felt good, strong, grounded. Leaning back, felt vulnerable. Middle one wasn't steady because I was leaning back. Head hanging down, felt vulnerable. Didn't like the last one, it felt negative. Just standing up made me feel more vulnerable to be engaging in a workshop with physical movement, absolutely. And so it's interesting to hear all of these different responses, right? Because we all have very subjective, different subjective experiences with posture, with emotions, with movement, with all of these different things. And so you physically cannot have a one size fits all approach with anybody, because everybody has such a different subjective experience. So what feels vulnerable for me might feel powerful for the next person for whatever reason. Thank you for sharing. First posture immediately made me think negative thoughts, slumped and head lowered. And so part of the purpose of this workshop is to really understand what we consider little things like posture really has an impact on our emotional state, how we feel about ourselves, about the world, about the different people that we're around in our experiences. So if you're at work, for example, and maybe it's not as exaggerated as a posture, but maybe it's similar where your shoulders are slumped, maybe your head is down, your eyes are, gazing elsewhere. How does that impact your emotional state? How does that impact the way that you feel about your position, yourself, your relationships? So we're going to move towards regulation and talk a little bit about that. So we have 4 different types of regulation that we typically engage in. And so auto-regulation is typically our, automatic behaviors that we engage in when our body just sometimes needs an outlet. So it could just be that we're bored. It could be that, maybe we're neurodivergent. We just need something to fidget with, whatever the case might be. So that could look like maybe you pull on your earlobes, maybe you're shaking your leg, maybe you're tapping your fingers, maybe you're playing with a fidget spinner, you're, fiddling with your rings, right? So that's our auto regulation. Our body needs to, get out some energy for whatever reason. Our self-regulation. So that is our practices of regulation that we do solely with ourselves. So that could look like when I engage in, breath work, or when maybe I'm feeling anxious, I grab an ice pack out of the freezer, put it on my chest. Co-regulation, I like to describe as sort of borrowing another nervous system. So this could be a person, this could be a pet, but the idea is that you're with someone or something that has a regulated nervous system that you can borrow. And so that concept comes from childhood, because the child and the mother, they co-regulate, and co-regulation is how we learn ideally to self-regulate. So a child always borrows the mother's nervous system in order to regulate them. And then we have traumatic adaptations. And so these are sort of our overdeveloped coping tools. So that could look like our dissociation, our self-harm, suicidal ideation, all of those pieces around dysregulation. Those are sort of our traumatic adaptations. And so really it is dependent on, number one, our knowledge and experience at the time, what we sort of engage in. But if we don't have necessarily the knowledge or experience, a lot of the times what we'll do is engage in our traumatic adaptations or overdeveloped coping skills. And sometimes self-regulation, co-regulation, or auto-regulation. And so in the chat, what do you notice that your go-to is? Is it auto-regulation, self-regulation, co-regulation, or traumatic adaptations? Auto and traumatic, I think. Traumatic adaptations and auto. Self-regulation, if and co-regulation difficult to ask for, feels vulnerable. Absolutely. A little auto and self. Shaking leg. What exactly is the traumatic? What have we done? What we've done when in trauma. So the traumatic adaptations are sort of the coping skills that are derived from trauma. So let's say you experienced emotional neglect as a child and all of your emotions were shut down, or your parents just had no interest in getting to know you. So your traumatic adaptation from that might be, let's say, hyper-independence, right? So you are like, hey, I don't need anybody. I can do everything myself. I feel really dysregulated. I feel really vulnerable. I'm going to rely on myself instead. It's hard to ask folks to show up, and many don't know how to when you ask. Absolutely. And so again, the idea of being curious is important here. So whether it's auto-regulation, right? And maybe you're shaking your leg, maybe you're biting your nails, picking at your skin, whatever it might be, asking yourself the curious questions of like, oh, I wonder what's happening here. Is it just like I'm bored and I've just been waiting for too long? Is there something about this environment or this person or these places that make me feel really nervous or uncomfortable? Like, what's happening for me? And so when we can be curious and ask ourselves those questions of like, oh, what's going on here? Versus, oh man, why am I biting my nails again? My nail beds are like sort of gone to shit and they just like look so bad. Why do I keep doing that? What's happening here? Why do I feel like I need to bite my nails right now? Why do I feel like I need to pick at my skin? Or why is my leg shaking right now? What's happening? That lens can give ourselves the space to actually understand what's happening versus just judging the behavior itself. Because again, the behavior comes from a need. There's a need somewhere, and sometimes we don't know what the need is, which is okay. But the behavior comes from a need. And so once we can give space to the behavior, it allows us to understand the need a little bit better. And so that takes us to the feeling your feelings. And so the first step is sort of observing with curiosity, like we've talked a lot about today, giving yourself the space in order to be curious, in order for some of these thoughts, feelings, sensations, behaviors to exist without judgment. And then the second step is identifying a motivation or inclination. And so like, what's happening here again? So if we use the skin picking example, maybe I am around a bunch of new people, or maybe I'm in this workshop and I'm feeling really nervous and anxious because we're talking about my relationship with my body, and it's making me feel really vulnerable. And my outlet for that is to skin pick, because it gives my body something to focus on. It gives my body a different sensation to feel versus whatever's happening in here. And so if there's a need that comes out of this, like, oh, I feel really vulnerable, what is the need there? Maybe the need is just like, oh, I just need to sit with it. Maybe the need is like, oh, I need some reassurance. Maybe the need is like, okay, maybe it would be nice to have, a warm drink or a cold drink. And I'm seeing in the chat, what if you don't know the need? You might not know the need, which is absolutely okay. I think, again, that's the idea around the curiosity, is that sometimes you experiment and sometimes you don't get it right, and that's okay. But I think if we focus on how can I get rid of this emotion, then that's sort of where we end up in trouble a little bit, because we don't actually give space to it. And a lot of times we're trying to just get rid of the negative emotions rather than understanding, like, why is it here in the first place? And so you might notice, okay, when I'm anxious, I might experiment with calling a friend. Maybe that doesn't feel helpful for me. Okay, next time I'm feeling anxious, maybe I'm going to experiment with, okay, let me put an ice pack on my chest. And maybe that works. Maybe it doesn't solve it completely. Maybe that works a little bit though. Okay, so ice pack on the chest, and that's in my toolbox. What else can help? What else am I needing? Maybe I need to slow down a little bit. Maybe I need to cry. Maybe I need a weighted blanket. And someone is asking, is that why the cold water ice pack helps, it distracts your brain? Yeah, so less of a distraction, I would say, and more of a grounding. So the cold water, the ice pack, allows you to focus on that sensation and brings you into that present moment. Whereas typically the anxiety, whatever is happening in the moment, is all about stuff that perhaps hasn't happened yet, or all about stuff that is a feeling memory from the past. And although there's all these sensations that you're experiencing in your body, you're not actually in the present. You're experiencing all of these different feelings from whenever. So the ice pack or the cold water, whatever it is, helps to bring you to the present. And I know that we're running out of time a little bit here, so I want to just get to the last slide, and then we can go over any questions or all of those different pieces. But the last piece is integrating somatic practice. And so the first point there is sort of stretching and movement. So integrating gentle stretches or mindful movements like shoulder rolls, neck stretches, or like a few minutes of yoga, whatever it might be, that can be helpful as far as connectedness to your body. So the idea is being able to feel different things a little bit more. So when you stretch your neck, for example, and you feel the tension release, or you can feel the tightness, the idea is that you want to be in tune enough to be able to feel what's happening, and if your body is feeling tight or if it is needing something. Second piece there is sensory check-in. So practice intentionally tuning into one or more of your senses, right? So at the beginning, I had asked you guys, to list something that you can currently feel. And that might be, okay, I'm going to tune into like, oh, what does it feel like to have my sweater on my body? What does it feel like to have this headband around my head? And we might notice that as we tune in, we might notice, oh, my pants are actually really uncomfortable, or, oh, this sweater is actually really itchy and I didn't notice that before. Or this headband feels really tight and I didn't notice that before. And practicing resourcing. So practice utilizing different tools such as self-compassionate touch, experimenting with temperature, postures to assist with resourcing when you're dysregulated. So it's really important to start practicing different things when you're regulated, when you're in your window, versus trying to practice it only in the moments where you're feeling anxious or dysregulated. Because the idea is that we want part of these coping tools to be in our procedural learning. So if we remember that tying the shoes, ideally, instead of having to think about, okay, how do I tie the shoes every time? How do I cope with this feeling or this sensation? That it becomes part of our procedural memory, that we can say, oh, I've practiced this so many times that this feeling of anxiety is coming up, and I know that it would be helpful for me to have an ice pack right now. And so I think a good place to start, if you are trying to start taking a look at, somatic practice, is starting with your basic needs. So your like hunger, your thirst, your bathroom needs, are you paying attention to that? And if you're not, then intentionally making an effort to say, okay, I'm going to set an alarm twice a day and just check in with myself. Am I hungry? Am I thirsty? Do I have to go to the bathroom? What does it feel like when it's a 2 out of 10 that I have to go to the bathroom, or a 2 out of 10 that I'm hungry, or a 2 out of 10 that I'm thirsty, versus a 9 out of 10? And the idea is that again, this is a very, very slow work, but increasing your awareness will allow you to be more connected. And so before we close with questions and thoughts and unpacking different pieces, I want to close with a bit of a grounding practice that may be helpful for you to use. And so I'm going to invite you to put your right hand over your left shoulder, and then your left hand underneath over your right shoulder. And then I'm going to guide us in a few breaths. So I want you to take a deep breath in through your nose and feel your belly expand all the way out. So inhale for 1, 2, 3, 4, and release through your mouth. 2, 3, 4, and inhale through your nose. Feel the air fill up your nostrils, your belly, and out through your mouth. Feel your breath on your lips. And as we breathe in this time through our nose, we're going to give ourselves a squeeze. So breathe in and squeeze. Out through our mouth and relax. In through our nose and squeeze. Out through our nose and relax. In through our nose and squeeze. Out through our mouth, relax. In through our nose and squeeze. As you squeeze, just notice your muscles tensing up. Notice the sensation. And relax. Exhale. Notice what it feels like for your muscles to relax. Again, inhale and squeeze. Notice what it's like for your muscles to tense. Exhale, release. Pay attention to those muscles as you exhale and release. And we're going to do a couple more deep breaths. So in through your nose, feel the air going through your nostrils. Out through your mouth, feel the air on your lips. In through your nose. Out through your mouth. Last one, in through your nose. And out through your mouth. Before you come back to the room, just wiggle your fingers a little bit. You can uncross your arms, stretch them out. Notice the sensation of stretching. Notice where it feels tight. You can give your arms a cross either way. Again, notice the stretching. Stretch out big. And then come back to the room. How was that for folks? You're so welcome. So if you have any questions, feel free to, I think that there's a Q&A portion that will be opened. So feel free to put your questions there. If not, feel free to connect with us via the QR code or the email. And I really appreciate everyone sharing and being vulnerable. I know that this is a brand new space, so it can be really difficult. So thank you all for being so brave. Okay, so I have a question. Could I describe again more about the trauma responses, the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, what that can look like outside of the big responses that we might imagine? Absolutely. So for the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, I'm going to go back to sort of the window of tolerance page. So our fawning and people pleasing, so that can look as quote unquote simple as doing things that we don't want to do very, very often. And maybe that's just part of who we are, that we say yes before we even know that we want to say no. And so I think that's, again, a piece of like the body connectivity, is that do we even know what it feels like to disagree with something when that feeling comes up? Because typically something happens in our body to say like, oh, you know what? I don't really like this, or this might not fit well with me. But we override that. And maybe that's our procedural learning to say like, yep, I'll do it. Yes, I agree, whatever that might be. So that's like a more insidious response around like the fawn response. The freeze often looks like functional freeze for a lot of people. And so as described in the chat, when we talked about where we sort of gravitate to as far as like our window of tolerance, a lot of people said hypoarousal because it just helps them get through the day. And so that functional freeze can be like, okay, I'm on autopilot and I can get through the day, but then by the time I get home, I'm done. I'm lethargic, I'm dissociative, I'm doom scrolling, I am eating more than feels good for my body, or I'm not eating at all. It's all of these different responses that are very normalized in society as well, right? So when you get home, you're just tired and you're just all of these different things, right? But really, when we are in that functional freeze space, it's just sort of Groundhog Day. So you go to work, you're able to perform or do your thing, there's lots of activation in the body. And then by the time you get home, that's it. So those are some of the more subtle responses for the fight, flight, freeze, fawn. So hopefully that was helpful. How can I tell the difference between a hypoarousal state and an ADHD freeze? So I'm assuming that you're talking about sort of like an ADHD paralysis sort of state. So I think that personally, I treat them similarly. So for folks that don't know, I also have ADHD, but as far as ADHD paralysis, I think, and freeze, to be honest, I think micro movements is often the most helpful. So when we think of both ADHD paralysis and hyperarousal, the thought of, okay, if I'm laying down doom scrolling in my bed, getting up to make dinner, that sounds like too big of a feat, and I'm probably just going to actually lay down and stay there for however long. So introducing the concept of micro movements can be really helpful. So instead of I'm going to go make dinner, I'm going to sit up in my bed and scroll. Okay, now that I'm sitting up and scrolling, maybe I'm going to go get a drink while I'm scrolling, and I'm not going to put the phone down, because the phone is actually what's regulating me right now. It's keeping me, I'm not in my window of tolerance, but it's trying to keep me regulated. This is my survival response. So the idea is I don't put the phone down until I'm actually able to get to wherever I'm supposed to get to. And so I often treat hypoarousal and ADHD paralysis fairly similarly. And generally for both, you're wanting something that is more activating. So with hyperarousal, you want to sort of bring the activation down. With hypoarousal, you want to bring the activation up. What's the best way to get out of functional freeze? And I would say that similar response. Micro movements is really helpful, but also really understanding what is it about your day-to-day that causes that dysregulation. Is it your work environment? Is it your relationships? Is it the monotony? What is it that's sort of causing that functional freeze response? And yes, the micro movements, but also addressing some of those pieces. So if it's the work environment, what is it about the work environment that causes this dysregulation? Is it my work relationships? Is it my job itself that I feel too stressed? Is it my relationship with myself? So I think it's really about being curious about, when does this typically happen for me? Is there a time where I'm not in functional freeze, and what's different about those times? And then I'm seeing a question, what if it's about something that you can't control, like the state of the world? Absolutely. And I think as far as the state of the world, the most that we can really do is try and cope, because I think these responses are very normal based off of what's happening, right? If we're seeing, violence, devastation, discrimination, all of those different pieces, and we're feeling dysregulated, that's a very normal response to have to trauma that we're witnessing. And so I think it's more so about how can I get support for those pieces in order to help me live my day-to-day life versus how can I not feel that? Because we don't not want to feel the devastation of that, because again, that's normal. We shouldn't be seeing a lot of the things that we're seeing. Look, a lot of the things that's happening in the world shouldn't be happening. Do you have any resources to recommend? Feels like there's a lot of messages on social media about this stuff, and can't imagine it's all solid or evidence-based. That's a great question. I think I agree with you. I think that it's not always evidence-based. As far as resources, I would say, if you're looking for as far as therapy, I think vetting your therapist to make sure that they are sort of trained in the aspects that you want assistance with. So during consultations, if your therapist offers free consultations, asking some of these questions about what is your understanding about the relationship between the nervous system and the body, and these are some of the things that I'm struggling with. As far as books, what is that book called? Complex PTSD. It's by, I don't know if I can see it there. I'm gonna give it a quick Google. There's a book called Complex PTSD that I think is incredible. And then there's another one that's newer that's called The Nervous System Reset that is really helpful. It's called Complex PTSD From Surviving to Thriving, and it's by Pete Walker. And there's a few other resources. I'm not quite sure how to help you with that. Sorry, my Alexa went off. There's a few other resources, for example, Peter Levine, his book, what is it called? And this is more on Park's work. Waking the Tiger, absolutely. Any other question? Another great book actually is No Bad Parts by Richard Schwartz.
Oh, thank you so much, Simone. Thank you for that 90 minutes and also going over time with us. I learned some new things, some new terms, and I can't wait to rewatch this webinar. So I also appreciate your generosity in letting us record this session and have it available on our YouTube after. I'm just going to reshare my screen quickly again. You gave us such a great grounding exercise, but just encouraging folks to check in with themselves after this. We also have resources for our student, staff, and faculty. If you need something beyond some self-care, beyond connecting with others. As well, please evaluate our programs. We really appreciate you coming to UFlourish. So here's a QR code and a survey link. We'll follow this up in an email as well. And when we have our recording ready from Simone, that's it, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us, Simone. Again, really appreciate you and taking us through all of this material. Is there anything else you wanted to mention, Simone? Any of your services, your website, anything else?
Yeah, no, not anything other than what I mentioned. We are having another community event in December. We're going to be doing just like a Christmas games night and gingerbread making and all of that kind of stuff. So if you're looking for community, would recommend checking that out. But yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah, we're so lucky that you're local to Calgary.
Yeah, thank you so much for
Cool.
that.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. We're going to close up the webinar now. Thank you so, so much.